So I think, first of all, Kyle, this is really interesting for me because we actually haven't had the opportunity to really speak since you were in the semi-finals. So this is going to be good just to kind of find out for my sake a little bit more, and everyone else is going to be a fly on the wall in this case. But before we get to all of that exciting, glamorous Hollywood stuff, I think let's just start off with finding a little bit more about you and find out a little bit more about what was your journey into becoming a speaker, joining Toastmasters, and ultimately starting the business that you run now. Do you want to give us a little bit of a lowdown into how it all came to be?
Yeah. I actually think it happened subconsciously. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. When I was young, I was someone who was really seeking motivation. In school, I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere with my life. I felt like everything was terrible. So I went on YouTube and I started watching motivational videos. You know, the ones where you get a guy saying, "You can do it." So I started watching stuff like that, and then started to drift into the world of motivational speakers. And I started watching people like Les Brown, Tony Robbins, all of the classics. And I think subconsciously, that's where I began to build an attraction to speaking. I didn't pursue it at that point. I never thought about standing up and speaking, but I think that stuck with me. Those videos resonated deeply. And when I first began was really many years after that, probably about 8 years after initially watching those videos, when I was just about to graduate from university. I was studying a psychology degree, but after 4 years of studying psychology, guess what I figured out? I didn't want to be a psychologist. So I was a bit lost. I was meandering around, and I started just trying a bunch of different things. And one of those things was walking into a club like Toastmasters and doing a little bit of public speaking. And as many people know, my first time said 2 words and then sat back down, but stayed in it because I just felt there was something special about that experience. Standing up, everybody looking at you. Yes, I crumbled that first time, but I wanted to get up there again. There was something in me sort of driving me, pulling me towards that stage again. And so I did. And with little steps, I eventually lost that fear, built up my confidence. And a very kind lady at that initial club actually offered me a speaking gig, David. She asked if I wanted to speak in front of 300 students at Strathclyde University, where I was studying at. So I was a 4th year, and I was going to be speaking in front of 1st years. And it was a huge step up. I was terrified. I practiced. But it went really well on the day. And then that's where I kind of thought, you know what, I could maybe do this professionally. And then by the time I was graduating, I had a couple of different clients' experiences like that. I had a couple of accolades. We had been competing against each other, I think, at that point, early 2018. And so I thought, why not just go for this? And that's when I launched my business, Confidence by Design, because it's what I truly love to do. I just love this field of speaking, fascinated by it. And I'm still learning, like everybody else.
I find that story quite funny. Very similar. I have a psychology degree and I'm doing public speaking work. Neither of us became psychologists in the end. So if you want a pathway into speaking, it seems that doing a psychology degree and then doing something completely different afterwards is the way to do it.
I think that's the route. Because I learned after the 4 years that you had to do another 4 years. And I'm not an academic. Yeah. I thought at that point, this is not for me. But still, learned a lot in the degree that kind of helps a little bit now, I would say.
Yes, it's funny you should say that, because when you think of public speaking, you don't think it's like clinical therapy, but actually so much of what you start going into, you start looking at people's beliefs, and then you look at, well, human behavior, and you look at how we connect with each other. There's actually so much psychology that's sort of hidden within that. It's kind of backdoor psychology, like you think you're doing public speaking, but actually you're doing a lot of psychology work in yourself and then with other people as well when you're coaching them.
Yeah, 100%. It all sort of interlinks, doesn't it? And ultimately, when we stand up and speak, we're trying to gain a psychological reaction from our audience. We're trying to make them feel something. That's embedded in the basis of psychology at the end of the day. So it's all interlinked.
When you look at this journey, Kyle, and you started off and you said those 2 words that first meeting, you got this, I mean, talk about 0 to 100. You go from saying 2 words at a meeting to a presentation in front of 300 people. Where do you think was the point where you said, you know what, like, this is what I'm supposed to do, and I know that I'm good enough now to do this. Because it's one thing to get the idea of, okay, maybe I should try this out. But when do you think was the point, if there was a point, where it all clicked into place and you said, actually, like, I am supposed to do this, and I do have the skills to do it?
Yeah, it was that presentation at 300 people at Strathclyde University. They were first-year students. I was terrified going in. But what I did was I was really keen to get some feedback, because I'd never done this before. I wanted to know how I could improve, if anything. So I printed out 600 A4 sheets of feedback, and I put them all around the lecture theatre, trying to hope that I get a bit of feedback. And the majority of the students didn't fill them out at all. But I got a good about maybe 40 who filled it out, and it had like a rating out of 10, what you enjoyed, where I could improve. And, I thought I had done well. I held it together. But when I read the feedback and I kind of saw their words and what they thought of it and how it helped some of them on the day and how the ratings were actually quite good, I thought, yeah, I think I can do something here. This is what I'm meant to do, to use your words, David. So I think it was that point. It was that presentation which planted the seed. And then for the rest of my time at uni, it was planning the business, planning the website, planning what the name would be, planning what I would offer, figuring all that out. So then when I did graduate, I could launch myself fully into 100%.
Yeah. Just a reminder to everyone who's joined us in live, if you have any questions for Kyle throughout this interview, just post them in the comments. Might not get to them straight away. If there's a little lull or there's a break in what we're talking about, I'll have a quick look, and if it's a quick question, I'll just throw it to Kyle there and then. If it's a bit more elaborate, then what we'll do at the end, I think, Kyle, is just kind of collect a couple of the best ones, and I'll just throw them quick fire at you if if you're up for that.
Sounds good. Every question will be answered today, no doubt about it.
So let's now look a little bit at your Toastmasters journey. We're in the same Toastmasters Club, and I've been in the club maybe like a month or two longer than you. It was like very close together that we joined in. So I've seen literally from kind of 0 to 100 of the beginning to where you are now, looking at your journey. Where did you first find out about Toastmasters? Why did you join? And then what were your first impressions of, say, the first 6 months or so? Yeah,
great questions there. So that club I mentioned where I stood up, said 2 words, sat back down. It was called the Association of Speakers Clubs. They're like Toastmasters, just a heck of a lot older, is what I would say. At that club, I met our common friend, James McGinty. And James told me about Toastmasters. He said, hey, if you're enjoying this, you should check out Toastmasters. So the first thing I actually did was I typed it in online. And of course, when you type Toastmasters into YouTube, what comes up? The World Championship of Public Speaking. And I started watching some of these world champions, and I thought, I would really like to do this. I'm a very competitive person by nature. I'd love to get involved in that. So James invited me along to Central Toastmasters, our club, which meets on a Wednesday night on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays. If you want to come along, anyone, you're more than welcome.
Nice pitch.
yeah, just thought I'd slide that in there subtly. So I went along there, and the first person I saw speak at the club was David. David was delivering it was a humorous speech, if I'm not correct and not mistaken, about your Pollock Shaw's Pollock Shield moment.
Yes.
Yeah. To summarize that, I think David, it was your first ever professional speaking gig, and you happened to go to the wrong place, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, David?
Yeah, nailed it.
And he was a little bit late, and he was a little bit sweaty by the time he arrived. So that was my first experience, seeing David McRae describe himself sweating in front of an audience. That was my first ever experience of Toastmasters. And once I heard that, once I imagined that, I thought, yes, I want more of that. So I jumped straight in. And the first 6 months were really interesting because Toastmasters was very different to this other organization I was part of. A lot more relaxed, a lot more friendly, a lot more modern as well, I would say. And it was just a really good place for us all to practice. We had quite a few professional speakers in our club, I think even at that moment, David, and it was just a great place to practice the craft. while I was still at university, while I was still getting ready for the business as well. And just getting that great feedback really did serve me well. And then we had our first contest in March 2018. And me and David went in the evaluation and the international speech. I beat David in the evaluation. I'm always holding on to that victory, David. But David beat me in the international. In fact, I didn't place in the international. It was you, and then it was another member called Parag. And there was only 3 of us, so I think I might have came last that day, which isn't that good. And that was my first experience in the contest.
So how did you turn from not qualifying in that very first round of the contest, and how did you start piecing it together over the years? For the audience who maybe aren't aware, we have 2 biannual contests. So we have 2, the humorous speech and table topics, which is improv speaking, that's in the autumn. And then we have the international speech and evaluation, that's in the March. We're focusing really on Kyle's journey in the international speech. That's where you can become the world champion. So you only get 1 shot per year. And it's only been 3 years since that first shot. So how do things start to come together a little bit more over the next few years for you?
Watching the speakers in the contest. So, for example, what happens after our club contest is we go into the area contest, the division contest. So area best in Glasgow in our case, division best in Scotland in our case, and then it goes all the way up into the UK and Ireland, best in UK and Ireland. And because I was still in the evaluation contest, I was still progressing through the levels, but I was also, while doing that, watching the international very closely. So I was able to learn a lot from yourself, David, and your story. I think it was about your dad that year. Yeah, I was able to learn a lot about what you did, how you connected with the audience. I learned a lot from other competitors who took a bit more of a humorous approach to it. And just taking in all of that data, I began to see a little bit of patterns of who was succeeding and who was not. What were the ingredients they had in their speech? And one of the key ingredients was a personal story. A personal story. And that was the one thing I did not have in my first entry into the international speech contest. So I wanted to make sure for the next year that I would have that personal story in there. And I did, and it got a little bit further. And I just went through that same process again, putting something out there, testing it out, seeing how far I get, and if I get defeated or even if I win, figuring out how I can improve things little bits at a time. Asking myself, what are the other competitors doing better than me? So that second year, there was someone, well, a competitor, and he's still competing, called Jerry in our division in Scotland. And Jerry was a very funny guy. And in the second year I was competing, he had a very funny speech. My speech was a little bit more serious. It was about my gran. And Jerry succeeded me in that moment. So I realized, okay, I need to add a bit of humor here. So it's just that process of getting beat, figuring out what went wrong, but also winning and figuring out how I can improve as well, which has made these incremental improvements, I would say.
You mentioned a really key aspect of speech, which is the personal story and having that vulnerability and challenge. The thing with a personal story, though, is that sometimes people tell them and they don't really work, or they don't have that really deep emotional impact. And when you've been to a few contests, you'll hear lots of people telling these personal stories, but there's some that connect a little bit more than others. What do you think the difference is between just saying, oh, this is my life and this stuff happened, and then a speech which really kind of tugs the heartstrings of your audience?
I think it's having a universal touch point. A universal touch point. So if you think about everyone around the world, there's always challenges which we can connect with, no matter where you are, no matter if you're in India, no matter if you're in Canada, Greenland, wherever you are, there are certain things that happen in our lives which we've all experienced. Many of us, for example, have felt lost, like I did when I was finishing my psychology degree. Many of us have had an insecurity in our lives. And it's these sort of touch points which will allow you to connect with your audience. So it's choosing a topic. If you choose something quite niche, a niche problem, which only relates to your life, then you're almost excluding the masses. And we're talking to the masses. We're talking to the world in this contest. So you have to be very careful about the topic you pick so that you can create that connection.
So let's look at this year. You had a couple years of trial and error of, okay, I need this, and okay, I need to add this. And then 2021 is where it really started to come together for you. Do you want to take us through blow by blow? It doesn't have to be every single round, but talk about how this, maybe your approach to the speech. Let's start with the approach to the speech this year. What do you feel you looked at differently as you were preparing this speech for this contest in 2021?
Well, one thing I definitely did differently this year was I gave myself a lot of time. Time is needed to really think about your ideas carefully, because you've only got 7 minutes to make this impact, so you've got to make it count. So I spent a lot more time planning, thinking about what I wanted to say, and really trying to get to the core of what I wanted to say as well. What was my key message? Was I able to summarize that in 10 words or less? Because once you have that foundational phrase, once you know what you want to say, then you can begin to build every line of the speech around that. So it was being more intentional with exactly what I was trying to say, and learning a little bit more about what the audience needed to see, to believe that message. And what they need to see is a transformation in you as a speaker, right? You're their first point of contact, and whatever your message is, you need to be living that. So that was something I worked on very closely in the prep and the build-up to the contest.
Mm-hmm. Let's now move into the development of the speech, because I feel that the most difficult part of the speech is the first time you deliver it, because you really don't know whether it's going to work or not, and you think, man, I've got this nailed. I'm telling such a good story, and I'm using such good techniques. And sometimes you deliver a speech and it doesn't get the response you want, and you go, oh, what did I do wrong there? So I feel the first time is the most difficult. But obviously, the first time you won the club contest, I always feel that's a little bit of validation of, okay, I've got something here that I can work on and develop. Do you want to talk us through how the speech developed round by round?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I made sure I knew I had something before the club contest, because I did it at other clubs. I made use of the virtual dynamic, and I went around quite a number of clubs and got feedback. I had a Google form, and I had a number of questions. What's my message? What did you like? Where could I improve things? I guess a little bit like that Strathclyde feedback form all those years ago. I was doing that, but with specifically this contest in mind. So I was able to take that data and see what gaps were missing in my speech. So then by the time it came to the competitive season, I had a speech which I was confident in. I had got a lot of feedback and known how it was being perceived by the audience. And then it was about taking that momentum and continuing on from the club contest. So me visiting other clubs and getting feedback did not stop after club. It increased rapidly after that. Because what you have to make sure, and this is absolutely key, you have to make sure that for each round, you're going in with a different speech. You're going in with a different speech. If you are going into the area round, the next round, with the same speech, the exact same speech you had before, no change in delivery, no change in content, no change in feeling or emotion that you're trying to get across, you will be caught up and beat. That is a reality. So you have to keep evolving vigorously, ferociously, to stay ahead of the competition.
Mm-hmm. I can confirm that happened to me that very first year we were in the international speech. In the area contest, in the Glasgow contest, I won the contest. Top two go through. In the next round, the person that I beat at Glasgow beat me at division. They changed their speech a lot more than I did. I made a couple of tweaks, but to be honest, I was a little bit complacent of, okay, right, I know I'm above them. I've just got to beat the other 6 that I haven't seen yet. And actually, the only person I didn't beat was the person who I'd already seen their speech, and I could have adapted to that a little bit more. So I can absolutely attest, keep working on your speech. Don't rest on your laurels.
And you know something? Sometimes you can be the victim of your own success. You really can, because you get a victory, you start feeling good, you think you've got something here, and then you do very little, like you experienced, David, and it's happened to me as well in the past too. So you've literally got to treat each round like you lost. You've got to treat each round like you lost, and ask yourself, like, how can I improve this? Because if you're serious about this contest, you've got to look past the people you've got to also be in the moment, but you've also got to look beyond where you currently are. You've got to think long term, but also realize that anyone can beat you. I've been beaten by speakers I did not think were near me. So anyone can beat you in this contest. You cannot rest on your laurels. You have to be 100% all the time, but you've also got to have that vision of where you want to go and be thinking about the long-term strategy. So it's that sort of, you know, weighing up the scale of looking long-term, but being present so that I'm not going to be complacent when I come up against competitors in this round.
Mm-hmm. For anyone who has been joining us as the interview has been going on, just a reminder, if you have any questions for Kyle about Toastmasters, if you're a Toastmaster, about competitive speaking, about speaking in general, pop all of those in the comment thread. I've seen one or two coming through. If there's a quick one and we've got a lull in the interview, I can pitch it to Kyle. But probably what's going to happen is we're going to pick out a few select questions and we're going to ask them to Kyle at the end. Just a little public service announcement for our audience. Now, Kyle, back to you. You got to the point of getting further than you'd ever done before. You won the Scottish Championship, you won the UK and Ireland Championship, and that puts you through to the regional quarterfinals. And basically what happens there is everyone's speech is recorded and the recordings get watched and a select few get picked out. Your recording got picked out. That puts you into the World Championship semi-finals. The last 28 contestants out of tens of thousands of people enter this contest. Last 28 Kyle got into. What happens then when you've been selected for the semi-finals? One of the big things, and I didn't learn this for a couple of years, you have to change your speech, don't you? You're not allowed to deliver the same speech that got you there. So that must be...
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. That was a choice I made.
Right.
What you have to do is you have to have two speeches. You have to have one for the semi-final and a different one for the final. So you can decide, to use my speech title, whether that's going to be the one you've been using all the way through, whether you have that for the final or the semi-final, but you do need to have a second speech. You do need to have a second speech. So I chose to, the speech I'd been using was about my dyslexia. It was about my struggles with that and how I was able to overcome that and turn things around. And I decided I wanted that speech to be for the final. I decided I wanted it to be for the final because it's literally my life in 7 minutes, and that's where I wanted to be for the final. So I came up with a different speech for my semi-final, which was one I'd done in the past, but I had refined and developed further. And it was about running the Loch Ness Marathon. And one of the lessons I learned in that, which helped me tremendously in my business. So that was the speech I decided to go for the semi-final.
Mm-hmm. And then, seeing as you've done that speech before, how did your conception and your approach to the speech change this time? Because rather than creating something from scratch, you're trying to improve on something that's kind of been done before. So how does your process change working with something that already exists rather than creating something completely out of the blue? Yeah.
So I had a little bit of knowledge how that speech went down last time. That speech got me to second place in the division round, second place in Scotland in 2020. Yes, that's correct. So I had a little bit of feedback. I knew what audiences were thinking a little bit from that previous attempt, but it wasn't good enough. It was nowhere near good enough to compete at this level. And I had evolved so much as a speaker as well that it really wasn't something I could work with at all. So I just scrapped it and went from scratch. Now, I included some things which I knew worked. For instance, there's a scene in my speech with a character called Vaseline Man. And you can check it out on YouTube if you want to see what that's all about. But that created a good bit of humor in person, and I knew it was something I wanted to include again. But I also made some changes in terms of the story structure, in terms of who delivered the message in the speech, how the message was going to come across at the end. Also intertwining the theme of business and the marathon, but then also this theme of mountains, because I wanted to try and make it more relatable for the audience as well. So that was my mindset going in, and I went through the same process of doing it at lots of different clubs. I found out I'd won the UK and Ireland Championship at the end of May. We were delivering the semi-final in August, and I went around 27 clubs in that time in between practicing that one speech, not along with the other one as well. So that was the sort of philosophy going in.
Mm-hmm. For the semi-final itself, it's split into two. So there's 14 in one semi-final, there's 14 in another semi-final. You didn't get through the semi-final with that speech. Looking at your other contestants, what do you feel were perhaps some of the margins where their speeches just maybe inched it compared to that speech? Have you got any insight there?
Yeah. Well, it's actually 4 semi-finals, and it's divided into 7 in each semi-final. And the top 2 get through. Right. Yeah. Here's what my thought process was after receiving the result, and after the sadness dissipates and so forth. And I've been reviewing it over the last month. I walked away from the semi-final. We record it before it's shown to everyone, I should say. I walked away from the recording thinking, yes, I think I did very well there. I did the best I could possibly do. I may get through, but I can't guarantee it. Can't guarantee it, because I knew it was close. Yeah. I knew it was close. I thought I would get through, but I knew it was close. And when you're close in a contest, the possibility of losing, of not getting through, is always so much more there. So there was not enough of a gap at all between me and the rest. Some of the things I think they did better than me, I think many of them played to the platform better. I think they played to the platform better. What I mean by that, well, my speech, the marathon speech, just naturally, it lended itself to humor so much, But online, you just don't get that contagious laughter. It's muted. And you would see in the past that so many world champions would win because of humor. It's one of the most powerful emotions you can evoke in an audience, to get them laughing, to feel joy. But you just don't have that contagious effect online. And what many of my competitors did instead was they went for deeper emotions. They went for more empathetic emotions, sadder emotions. Many people talked about people who had passed away, for example. And I think those emotions translate better on camera. And I think they perhaps had more of an impact because of that. Maybe I could have been a little bit more creative with the camera as well, I would say. So it was a number of things like that, amongst other things, which I just think, I just rushed into the topic. I rushed into doing that speech instead of taking a step back and thinking about what would actually be a speech everyone would connect to. So these sort of things are points I've realized that I got wrong, and I'm looking to change and rectify going forward. So, and in some ways, this is the best way I could have lost, because I've still got my best speech, the one that means the most to me. I've still got that. I just need to go back to the drawing board, create another speech, take on these points for improvement, because that's what it's all about, and go again and see where we go.
So looking ahead into the next contest will be next year, start of March. Obviously, you don't want to give away all of your secrets, and especially given you'll be competing against me, you don't want to give away all of your secrets. But if you could summarize for our audience, what are some of the key things that you need for a successful competition speech? And of course, a successful competition speech, it doesn't have to be for a competition. It can be your TEDx talk. It can be a talk at work. It can be a talk to your local community center. The same good principles are still there. If you could give us, say, 3 top tips, what would they be?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, firstly, like we spoke about before, topic is so important. It needs to be a topic which really connects universally. So I'll be looking to do that from the very start. I'll also be looking to play to the platform. I'll be looking to bring in the emotions which actually affect people more virtually than physically, for example. And I think the other thing is just a bit more creativity. A little bit more creativity with Zoom in terms of how we use the platform, in terms of how I can make things stand out. That's something I'm going to look to approach as well. But ultimately, it's all about figuring out how to connect with your audience. We know it's going to be a storytelling contest. David, you're going to have a story. I'm going to have a story. But how can we make our story different? How can we make our story stand out? These are the questions I'm going to ask myself going in, and look to make adjustments, whether that be in delivery, whether it be in content, everything really. I'm going to try my very best to make my story just a little bit different from everyone else. And what I've learned is it can't be close. There's got to be a big gap. Otherwise, you know, your possibility of losing is always there.
Yeah. If we open up the bubble a little bit more, we've been looking very much at Toastmasters and the World Championship, but there's more to what you're doing than just that. As you said, you started that business right out of uni. You started speaking and speaking coaching. And then, of course, spring last year, the public was taken out of public speaking. So how have you been adjusting and adapting over these last 18 months as a public speaking coach, which doesn't have the public in it anymore?
I brought everything online, like we all have. I mean, you've done a tremendous job too, David, creating this fantastic group, bringing speakers together. And that's what it's all about, just finding a way to do things differently. So I've taken all my training and put it online. I've been working with companies online now. I do my one-to-one training online. I started a membership group as well, where every month I'm covering a different topic in public speaking, and that's all virtual too. I think where we'll stumble, where we'll fall, is when we're not willing to just embrace what's coming, right? Yeah. And this is so clearly here to stay. It's going to be the way going forward. I don't know, maybe one day there'll be no audiences at all, and it's all going to be virtual. I don't know. But I think we need to run towards this and set up our businesses as if it's all going to be virtual going forward. That's what I predict anyway. So yes, it's just about adapting, changing things up in that respect.
I want to focus on one particular aspect of your business, just to start rounding things off, and then we'll move into the questions. You mentioned that your speech this year was talking about your challenges with dyslexia. And I've got something here. It's your book. Now, yeah. How does someone with dyslexia decide that they're going to write a book? Do you want to share a little bit of the journey and the thinking process into how this came to be?
Yeah. Well, that right there is one of my biggest challenges as a dyslexic, writing that. What that book came from is called The 5 Pillars of Effective Public Speaking. And that was one of my first ever workshops. So in that same year, 2018, when I launched my business, I did that workshop for the first time in November. It was a free workshop. People could just come along, and I was able to start putting some of the concepts together. And what it's all about is the 5 key pillars. 4, 5, here we go. We got the fingers right. The 5 pillars which make the biggest difference in speaking. I'm happy to share what they are here. It's body language, voice, structure, clarity, and impact. So that concept started off as a workshop. And as we moved in, well, it wasn't even actually the pandemic which did this for me. At 2020, by the time 2020 came around, I decided I wanted to write a book this year. I'd actually watched you, David. You've done many books before. And I thought, yes, it's a great idea to get all of your ideas on paper so people can actually use it and they've got something physical in front of them. You can be there without being there. That was my mindset on it as well. And you can get your book out there and help as many people as possible. So I started writing it early 2020. By the time we had got to June, I'd done the first copy, the first draft. And of course, having that experience of the workshop helped a lot because I knew what 5 things I'd be speaking about. And it was having my girlfriend, Emma, who's become a copywriter now, by the way, and my mum look over it and see all the spelling mistakes, make the adjustments where needed. And they helped me a lot with the grammatical side of it and the things that dyslexics might get caught up with. And then eventually I went to the studio. I made it an audiobook as well, because that's how I take in my books. And I wanted to create something which would be, available for people like me. And now it's out there. It's out there, launched September 2020 in ebook, paperback, and audiobook form. And it's really been fantastic to see how far the book has traveled. It's been in the US, it's been in Australia, which is tremendous. But also just the impact it's had on people. It seems to really help people. Because one of the other things I thought about when making it was making it as simple as possible. So many public speaking books are full of jargon, they're quite dull, they're quite mechanical. I wanted something that was straightforward, that someone could pick up, and it's a great starter guide or a way to improve even if you're a bit advanced at public speaking. So that was a goal, made it happen, and I think I'll do another one, perhaps in a couple of years.
Awesome stuff, and I can attest, I'll just show the audience. So it's not a thick book, and that's not to take away from, because it's a thin book, it doesn't have much in it. It's very digestible. It's There's no fluff. There's no kind of big grand story of how Winston Churchill discovered his speaking prowess. It's just, look, you've got a speech. How do you structure it? Boom, boom, boom. Okay, how do you deliver it effectively? Body language, boom, boom, boom. It's very simple, very easy to digest. I'll pop a link in the comment thread below this video. And as Kyle said, it's in all the formats. I know a lot of people do audio nowadays. I haven't really got into the audiobook to listen to podcasts, but I can't concentrate with a book. I keep on losing my place. I've got to read it. Fair. That's just me.
Yeah. I'm not the best at reading, so that's probably why I'm forced onto the audio. But yeah, it's got everything I knew about public speaking up until I would say 2020 June. It's all in those pages. I just threw it all in there. So yes, it's ready and available. And thank you for that shout out, David. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, dude. So I'm going to ask an obvious question, and I don't want you to give the obvious answer. The question is, what's the next thing that you're working on? Obviously, you want to be the world champion of public speaking from what we've talked about before. So what's the non-obvious answer to that question?
One thing I am working on right now is making my business a little bit like Netflix in a way. And what I mean by that is I've got a membership group, okay, where we meet up every month, we practice a new skill, we learn something new. But the biggest challenge, the biggest obstacle I have with my members, David, is time. It's time. So many of them say, I don't have the time to attend. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I just can't commit the time. So I'm trying to find a way to get around that problem and make all of the webinar recordings, all of the PDF resources available for people all the time. And I think that's going to be an on-demand option. So that's something I'm looking to create for my business in the background. And that's going to be coming in very soon as well. Above all, it's just all about trying to grow the business. I'd love to be able to get to the point where I can begin to take on other trainers. My dream personally as a speaker is to get onto the big stage. And by big stage, I mean 20,000 people. I want to see how that feels. So that's my goal, David. That's what's driving me. I think I can do something special with the speaking. I really do think I can help a lot of people going forward. I think eventually I'm going to have to move to North America to make that happen, because that's where
me too,
where most of the industry is. But yes, it's all about growing, developing, and evolving not only in business but myself, and ultimately one leads into the other.
Yeah, we have a few North Americans who are joining us for this interview. So myself and Kyle, we will be on your continent at some point in the future. So make sure you remember us while we're here, and then when we're big, you can come and see us when we're in North America. What I'll do now, Kyle, is I'll move into the questions. So firstly, this is a prompt for anyone who's been on live, you've been watching Kyle, and if anything's come up at all, whether it's been related to the stuff we're talking about, or if you just have a public speaking question, and remember, you've got 2 speaking coaches right now, so if you want to pick some brains, this is the time to do it. Any questions that you have, stick them in the comment thread. I'm going to start off with David Martin's question. I promise you, David, that I'll save this. He actually asked this on the live that never was, the one that I I ended to get you on this one. So just give you some context. David Martin is he's a fellow Toastmaster in Paris, and he's entered lots of contests. He's gone to division and district level, so he knows who your coach is, Prez. And what he was asking is, how did that come about? Was that a moment of synchronicity, or did you reach out and say, listen, I want to learn how to be world champion. Can you teach me? Do you want to tell us a little bit of that story?
Absolutely. So when I was preparing for this year's contest, the club won very early on. And I thought, I've had this goal of being world champion of public speaking ever since I joined Toastmasters. One of the reasons I joined, to compete, to try and make this happen. And I just thought to myself, you know what, if I'm going to take this seriously, if I really want to make this happen, why do I not have a coach? Why do I not have someone pushing me, challenging me, making me grow? And so I decided to reach out to Prez. And if you watch his World Championship speech in 2013, that's what it's all about, reaching out. So I reached out to him, and we had a chat. We seemed to have a good connection, and we started working together from there. And he's changed the way I view speaking. He really has. He's pushed me in ways, changed my speaking style in ways I wouldn't have thought. So he has been absolutely fundamental to what I've been able to achieve in the last 12 months or however long it has been. So 100%, that's how it came about. I reached out to him and we made things happen from there. And anyone who is serious about getting far in the contest, you should be getting a coach. You really should, because every competitor at that level has a coach, or if not a few coaches helping them along the way. So definitely something to think about.
And that's not a subtle pitch to get one of us too.
No, absolutely no. Absolutely not. But it's so critical to have someone that you can go to and talk about it in a candidly way. Because yes, you get all this feedback from clubs around the world, but they've never won the world championship, right? They've never actually done it. So if you can go to someone who's actually been there and done it where you want to go, it helps tremendously. It really does.
Absolutely. We've got Jen on the interview as well. Now, Jen hasn't asked this question, but Jen's one of my clients. I've been following her speaking journey for the last 16 months or so, and so I know what she's working on, and I think you'll have some tips to help her. One of the things that Jen really struggles with is, and she's so much better at doing this now, is she's very expressive, very creative, but she finds it difficult to get the balance between being expressive and creative and also having structure and being able to bring ideas together. And one of her goals is to get a keynote speech of 45, 60 minutes long. And she's thinking, man, when I get to about 20 minutes, I quite often run out of steam. So how can she maintain that expressiveness, but also have the structure in place where she can deliver a keynote that's 45 or 60 minutes long?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best thing to do there, Jen, would be to start with the end in mind. Like, know where you are going. What is the end of your keynote going to look like? And then reverse engineer it. Once you've got the end defined, once you know what that looks like, what your call to action is going to be, what your message is going to be, then go back to the start and ask yourself, how can I engage the audience on this topic? And then look into the middle and look at what key points you can have, which will lead nicely into that ending, which you've already created. So for a 45-minute presentation, that might be 3 key points. It might be 5 key points maximum. But by having those defined, now you've at least got a skeleton structure. A skeleton structure. You don't have to have every word in place. I wouldn't recommend that. But you do have to have significant points so you know where you are going. And that allows you to be creative. You can do things off the cuff around those points. But now you know your end destination, you know where you're going, you know what's going to fill your 45 minutes by this point.
David Martin's come back in response to your answer. He says the coachings get you a little bit of lobbying power in the semis behind the scenes, he reckons. And I'm going to use that as a little springboard. And you can answer this as diplomatically as you like, but I think it's worth thinking of for all speech contests, not just Toastmasters, not just competitions.
Yeah.
What do you think about the politics of Toastmasters and how that sometimes plays into the contests?
That's a very difficult question to answer. There's politics in everything in life. There's politics in everything. And the reality is sometimes, and you see this all the time in contests, the best speaker doesn't win. The best speaker does not win. And that's part of the game. That's part of the game. I mean, there's a very good chance that this time when I enter the contest, I won't win even if I am the best because I won last year. There's that possibility right there. So you've just got to kind of roll with it, I think. There's nothing you can do about it unless you want to pay people off. But I don't think that's very fair. So I think you've just got to embrace the fact that, look, you're not always going to get a fair crack at the whip, but this is part of the game. In sports, the athletes don't always get a fair shake. You know, in actual politics, the politicians don't get a fair shake. This is part of it. But if you keep going at it, eventually, they can only hold you back for so long, right? So you've just got to keep on going, keep on pushing. You might not always get the results you want, but commit to it long term. And if you're good enough, you will get through and you will get to where you want to go. That's how I'm looking at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wanted to bring that up, not to have a bitch and a moan about politics behind the scene, but more just to emphasize that sometimes you do everything right and it just doesn't work. and recognizing the difference between when you've done everything right and it just wasn't your day, and thinking, okay, was there something I could have done better? Because I think sometimes it's easy just to say, you know what, I did my best, and actually you should critically evaluate. But the other thing is true, that sometimes also we're far too hard on ourselves, and you just got to throw your hands up and say, look, you know, the audience was off color that day. I wasn't in the right context. That speech, it wasn't right for that audience, or I did my best, and for whatever reason, it just didn't work out today.
Yeah, but here's the caveat to that, right? The percentage of when you didn't get a fair crack, of when there wasn't something you could have done better, is so small. It's so small. The majority of the time, there is something you could have done to improve. And you know what? Sometimes a loss can be the best thing, because it makes you rethink things. It makes you realize you were not undeniable. So what can I do to be undeniable next time? So sometimes it can be a little gift.
I love that. If there's a slogan for this interview, I think it's going to be undeniable. I think that's been a common thread going beyond of, if you work, so your Cal Newport has a book, So Good They Can't Ignore You. And I think that's what you can do, is just keep on working till you get to the point where people have to take notice of what you're doing and what you're saying.
Yeah. No one wants to face something that's relentless. You can only last so long when you face that. That's the way you've got to approach these things. You might not get it through first time, second time, 12th time, but eventually, if you're good enough, you will get through that door.
So we have a tiny window left. If anyone's got a last minute question that you want answered live, get it into the comments really quick. If you're watching this on the replay and you've got a question, don't be afraid to pop that in the comment. I can answer it. If Kyle's got the time, he'll come back and answer it as well. I know that most lives aren't watched live. Most lives are watched on replay. So don't feel that just because you missed the opportunity to ask it live, obviously it's a lot better to have someone speak the answer to you than text the answer to you. But the option is still there if you have a question. But I want to hand over to you, Kyle. Do you have any final message that you want to give our audience before we wrap up today?
Yeah, look, whatever your goal is in speaking, whether it be reaching the TEDx stage, reaching the World Championship, growing your business, it ultimately comes down to you. And if you're not getting the results you want right now, that means you've got to change something. You've got to reevaluate. Maybe you do have to get a coach. Maybe you have to change your approach. But you have to do something to try and move forward. Inaction is going to leave you exactly where you are. So what I would say is look to take action. Look to do something different. We've got to evolve all the time. A little bit like the contest. If you don't continuously improve, people will catch you. So you've got to keep going with that mentality. And be undeniable. I think that's the slogan. That's the way I'm looking at the contest. I think that's the way we should all look at our businesses. Be undeniable.
See you next year in the contest. If I see that your contest entry is Be Undeniable, I want to claim some credit for that speech.
That's a good title.
Well, I did ask for a final message, but David Martins once again just slipped in with a last question. So I'm going to pitch that to you since we technically haven't ended the live. I think it'll be quite a simple one. David's asking, so what is Kyle doing before speaking? Stretching, meditating, drinking water, smoking vegetables? Question mark, question mark, question mark. What's your pre-speech routine?
Shadow boxing. I'm only kidding. I don't. What do I do beforehand? Well, I think it's just controlling the internal dialogue, right? Making sure that you're in a positive place, controlling your breathing, reminding yourself of all the work you have done, and perhaps even running through the opening lines of your presentation, because if you can start well, you will continue well. So it's just sort of the internal dialogue, which I'm thinking about in that moment, just reminding myself I'm ready to go. And the last thing I tend to say to myself is have fun. Let's have fun. Because when you have fun, that's when the best of you tends to come out. So that's what I do in the moments before I go up or stand up and speak.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your answers, and thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey with us today, Kyle. As I said, if you've got any additional questions, pop them in the comment threads. Myself and Kyle can get back to you after the interview is over. But Kyle, once again, thank you so much for sharing today. It's been an opportunity for us to catch up. I feel it's been ages since you're at the World Championship, and we still haven't really discussed it. September's always a mad, crazy one. It's just on to the next contest and Toastmasters, isn't it? So I really enjoyed finding out a little bit more about the experience. And as Kyle said earlier, if you want to pop into a club meeting, we still have virtual meetings at the moment. You'll see myself, you'll see Kyle, we've got James, who we talked about earlier. All three of us have won national championships in speaking. It's a really good opportunity to learn from some really great speakers. And even the speakers in the club that we have who don't necessarily compete, they're really good speakers as well. We really are blessed with talent at our club. And at the moment, you don't have to fly to Glasgow to come and visit us. We're all online in the beautiful virtual space. And as Kyle said, it's going to be here to stay. We've got to adopt it, we've got to embrace it, and we've got to approach and move forward to it. Kyle, I'm going to leave you to the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, David, for having me. Really appreciate it. And yes, absolute pleasure to come on today. Hope the audience gained some value.